I own a highly successful landscaping business down on the Gold Coast, and I'm used to doing the hard yakka 7 days a week, designing luxury gardens for high-end clients. I grew up in the foster care system, bouncing from one creaky, overcrowded house to another all across the state. I never had a real, warm home where someone was waiting for me with a hot dinner and a kind word. My only real mentor was an old farmer who took me in as a teenager and taught me how to feel the land. He showed me that even out of the most barren dirt, you can grow something beautiful if you put in enough effort. Ever since then, I firmly believed that honest, back-breaking work was the only salvation for a lonely bloke like me. I took on the grittiest jobs, hauling rocks under the blazing Queensland sun, digging trenches, and working my hands to the bone until they were covered in deep, bleeding calluses. Every tree I planted and every roll of turf I laid felt like a small step towards proving my own worth in this world. When I started my own company, I had no wealthy investors and no rich parents to fall back on, just a beat-up second-hand ute and a massive drive to prove myself. I got used to hiding my feelings behind a dirty high-vis shirt, mainly because life had a habit of kicking me in the teeth. But deep down, I always desperately dreamed of having a real, loving family that would become my own personal, unbreakable fortress. I wanted to be the reliable husband and father I never had growing up. My fiancée, Sophie, was an aspiring influencer, completely obsessed with aesthetics, perfect Instagram grids, and social media status. When she walked into my life, she felt like an absolute miracle, a bright angel descending into my dusty, working-class world. She was so refined, vibrant, and carefree, the complete opposite of my harsh reality. I looked at her and honestly believed I would move mountains and drain oceans for this fragile girl. I wanted to lay everything I was deprived of in my own rough childhood right at her feet. I naively thought that my boundless devotion and willingness to sacrifice myself would be the most solid foundation for our marriage. Every time I came home covered in mud and sweat, her smile made me forget all about the aching pain in my lower back. I genuinely believed my main job in life was to be a brick wall, shielding her from any hardships or financial stress. To me, love wasn't about pretty captions online. It was about concrete actions, paying the bills, providing a safe home, and ensuring a secure future. We'd been together for 4 years, and when I finally popped the question, she instantly and unapologetically demanded a $100,000 luxury wedding at an elite Hinterland winery. Even though her snobby parents always looked down their noses at me, treating me like some uneducated peasant with dirt under his fingernails, I truly loved Sophie and wanted to give her the absolute best. I swallowed my masculine pride and put up with her family's arrogant sneers because I considered her to be my greatest treasure. I figured if I just worked even harder, they'd finally see me as a worthy man and not just a filthy tradie. My soul, starved for affection for so long, was completely open, defenseless, and entrusted solely to her. I built our relationship the exact same way I built my gardens, with total dedication, truly believing the roots would grow deep and last forever. Unfortunately, I had no idea I was planting those flowers of genuine love into dead, thoroughly poisoned soil. It was exactly this blind faith that made me so incredibly vulnerable to the brutal betrayal waiting for me just around the corner. To entirely fund this extravagant dream wedding of hers, I took on even more grueling projects, pulling 7-day weeks and coming home completely dead on my feet. 2 weeks before our massive wedding, a severe tropical storm suddenly hammered the coast, forcing me to urgently cancel a concrete pour and head home in the middle of the day. The rain was coming down in sheets. My ute's wipers were barely keeping up with the deluge, so I decided to call Sophie just to make sure she was safe. "Hey babe, it's an absolute cyclone out here. We're packing up the site," I yelled into the Bluetooth, trying to be heard over the roaring weather. "Oh, I'm actually just laying here getting a massage at the day spa. The relaxation music is so nice," she purred sweetly in response. "You sure you don't want me to come grab you in this weather?" I asked, with genuine concern, straining my eyes against the flooded highway. No, darling. I'll be here until this evening. The girls are doing my pre-wedding body wrap," Sophie chirped in a completely calm, serene voice. "All right then, I'll just head home, grab a hot shower and tackle some paperwork," I replied, feeling a bit guilty for interrupting her well-deserved pampering session. "Love you, my little workaholic, miss you," she yelled happily before hanging up. I parked in our driveway, drenched to the bone, and sprinted inside, fully expecting to be greeted by the usual quiet of our empty house. The contrast between the howling storm outside and the perfect, almost sterile tidiness of our living room usually calmed my nerves. Sophie was supposed to be miles away at the expensive spa, but as I walked into the kitchen, I accidentally spotted a pair of expensive men's sunglasses sitting right on the island bench. I stopped dead in my tracks, feeling a nasty, sticky chill run straight down my spine. My brain immediately locked onto this bizarre detail because I had never owned a pair like that in my life, and we certainly weren't expecting any mates to drop by. They were high-end designer aviators, worth about half my weekly wage, carelessly tossed right next to her half-finished cup of coffee. "Where the hell did these come from?" I muttered aloud, instinctively reaching for my phone. I quickly shot her a text. "Hey love, did someone drop by this morning? Found a random pair of sunnies on the bench." The reply pinged back a couple of minutes later. "No, babe, the landscape architect probably left them last week. Don't worry about it." I frowned, because I knew for an absolute fact that I had personally wiped down that exact kitchen island last night, and it was completely spotless. "Weird, I cleaned up here yesterday, and they definitely weren't there," I texted back, feeling a burning suspicion starting to ignite in my gut. "You're always nitpicking over the smallest things. I told you I'm at the massage. Let's talk about it later," she replied sharply, her text dripping with irritation. That sudden burst of unprovoked aggression in her message was the final red flag I needed to realize she was lying straight to my face. I opened our smart home app to check the front door security camera and see who had actually come over, only to discover that the footage from this morning had been manually deleted. My heart rate spiked as the sickening realization hit me. Someone had intentionally tried to cover their tracks. "Why delete the footage if you've got nothing to hide?" raced through my mind as I frantically tapped the screen of my smartphone. I suddenly remembered that a couple of months ago, I had set up an additional hidden cloud backup, just in case we ever had a power outage. My hands were visibly shaking as I typed in the complex password for the backup server, a server Sophie didn't even know existed. I was desperately trying to convince myself that I was just going to see an Uber Eats delivery guy, and that my horrible thoughts were just the paranoia of an exhausted tradie. The page took an agonizingly long time to load due to the patchy storm reception, stretching my frayed nerves to the absolute limit. Suspecting the worst, I accessed the hidden cloud storage, and what I saw on that screen left me completely and utterly paralyzed with shock. My entire, painstakingly built perfect world collapsed in a single second, violently shattering against the filthy truth. I stared at the screen, physically unable to draw a breath, while the rain violently lashed against the windows outside. In crystal clear 1080p, my fiancée was passionately pashing my old high school mate who had recently moved back to town right on our front porch. My heart felt like it had been thrown straight into an industrial wood chipper. His hands were confidently roaming all over her body, the very same body I had treated with such deep reverence and love. A sickening wave of pure disgust washed over me, forcing me to lean heavily against the kitchen bench just to stay on my feet. The absolute worst part was that the built-in microphone clearly picked up their entire conversation. They were openly laughing about how her dumb tradie fiancé was footing the bill for her glamorous wedding, after which she fully planned to sneakily continue their dirty affair. She was giggling in that exact same sweet, angelic voice I adored, literally calling me a useful idiot with deep pockets. My former mate joked right back about how great it was having a sponsor to fund his fun. Every single sacrifice I made, every skipped weekend, and every painful callus on my hands was turned into a cruel, filthy joke by the woman I worshipped. The physical pain in my chest was so unbearable, I honestly thought I was having a heart attack. Hot, bitter tears of absolute humiliation burned my eyes, but I refused to let a single one fall. The blinding agony inside me rapidly mutated into a cold, dark, and absolute fury. My first instinct was to grab the sledgehammer from my ute and smash our pristine, picture-perfect house into splinters. But destroying my own property wouldn't solve a damn thing. It would only paint me as the unhinged, violent brute her parents always assumed I was. Instead of throwing a tantrum and wrecking the furniture, I cold-bloodedly downloaded every single piece of video and audio evidence onto a secure external hard drive. I made 3 separate backups, ensuring this lethal truth could never be erased or denied. I looked back at the expensive sunnies on the table and felt a dark, almost predatory calmness wash over me. She thought she was so incredibly smart, so far above me, but her massive arrogance left one fatal blind spot. Sophie had always insisted on having total control over the wedding planning, demanding her name be the primary one on all the VIP contracts just to stroke her influencer ego. Taking advantage of this, I secretly contacted the winery's management and every single vendor, calmly explaining the situation. I spent the next 3 hours on the phone, listening to the rain, methodically dismantling the financial trap I had built for myself. The event managers were absolutely shocked, but business is business, and my name was only listed as a secondary payer on the paperwork. Using the legal loophole in the contracts she had so vainly signed as the primary event organizer, I officially transferred all the final invoices strictly into her name and the names of her snobby parents, permanently unlinking my bank cards from the entire event. I formally withdrew my financial guarantees due to a breach of trust, and the contractors were more than happy to shift the liability entirely onto the primary signatory. The outstanding debt for the exotic floral arrangements, the elite catering, the premium vintage champagne, and the luxury venue hire came to a staggering $70,000. Her arrogant parents had previously acted as guarantors on the venue lease to secure the date, completely unaware of the massive financial bomb they were now holding. A dark, satisfied smirk touched my lips as the final electronic confirmations from the suppliers hit my inbox. The trap was perfectly set, and the steel jaws were primed to snap shut. When Sophie finally returned home that evening, smelling of massage oils and fake innocence, I greeted her with a warm, loving hug. It took every single ounce of my willpower not to strangle her right there in the hallway. I listened to her sweet lies about her relaxing day at the spa, nodding and smiling like the obedient, dumb ATM she thought I was. Enjoy your little fairy tale while you can, I thought to myself, looking deep into her beautiful, treacherous eyes. I knew that the higher she floated on her cloud of illusions, the harder and more devastating her fall was going to be. The countdown to our wedding day had officially turned into a ticking time bomb for her absolute public destruction. I was still going to give her that unforgettable, viral wedding day she so desperately craved. Only the script was going to be vastly different. I didn't cancel a single thing, keeping a stone-cold poker face right up until the day of the wedding, pretending everything was absolutely perfect. For 2 whole weeks, I played the role of the thrilled groom, watching her try on her designer gown and brag to her bridesmaids about the upcoming spectacle. The actual marriage ceremony was scheduled for the late afternoon, but I deliberately delayed signing the official registry, making the excuse that I wanted to do it privately after the reception. The massive hall was drowning in thousands of white orchids. The tables were groaning under the weight of gourmet seafood, and the waitstaff were endlessly pouring vintage champagne. Her parents sat at the head of the bridal table, looking down their noses at my handful of working-class relatives like we were second-class citizens. Sophie was practically glowing under the spotlights, soaking up the camera flashes and already drooling over the hundreds of adoring comments she'd get on social media. There were 150 guests at the lavish banquet, and when it came time for the traditional romantic photo slideshow, I confidently walked up to the projector. As the lights dimmed, the crowd erupted into joyful applause, expecting to see a touching montage of our love story set to acoustic music. Instead of cute baby photos, the massive screen in front of her entire shocked family suddenly lit up with that exact porch video, in perfect, high-definition audio showing the bride pashing another bloke and ruthlessly mocking her groom. For the first few seconds, people had no idea what was happening, assuming it was some sort of bizarre avant-garde prank. But then, my fiancé's distinct, mocking laughter boomed through the high-end speakers, calling me a dumb tradie, and the entire room froze in absolute horror. Her ultimate betrayal was broadcast in agonizing detail, mercilessly obliterating the flawless, pristine image she had spent years cultivating. I stood by the projector and stared dead at her father, watching his arrogant face turn blotchy purple with shame and impending dread. A deathly, graveyard silence fell over the massive hall, broken only by the pathetic, gasping sobs of a now ghostly pale Sophie. She jumped up from the table in a blind panic, trying to hide her face in her hands, while her bridesmaids whispered in pure shock, unable to believe their eyes. That same former mate she was kissing in the video was actually sitting among the guests, and right then, he was cowardly trying to do a runner out the back doors. I calmly picked up the microphone, thanked everyone for a lovely evening, and informed her parents that they were now legally on the hook for the entire $100,000 banquet. Leaving the guests staring with their jaws on the floor, I walked straight out of the hall, got into my ute, and drove off into a new, completely free life. I sincerely hope this luxury party was worth it. My voice had echoed calmly and loudly through the high ceilings of the winery just moments before. By the way, all the final invoices have already been transferred into your parents' names, Sophie, so good luck paying for those exotic orchids and the vintage champagne, I had added, dropping the mic right onto the table. Her mother had let out a hysterical gasp, clutching her chest as the reality hit her that this massive debt was now strapped to their flawless credit history. Not a single one of the 150 guests dared to say a word to stop me as I marched confidently down the aisle toward the exit. Stepping outside into the cool mountain air, I took a massive, deep breath, feeling the heavy chains of a toxic relationship slide off my shoulders forever. I fired up my trusty old ute and pressed the accelerator with a grin, leaving behind a woman who had single-handedly nuked her own life, chasing fake illusions. A lot of people might say that saddling her parents with that mountain of debt was a bit too harsh. But doesn't a betrayal like that deserve the ultimate payback? Let us know down in the comments what you would have done in my boots. Would you have cancelled it quietly or dropped the bomb publicly just like this? And don't forget to hit subscribe because we've got plenty more wild, true stories coming your way.